We're doing Chassidus, and it's our second class on HaOlah. It's our second class on HaOlah. HaOlah begins on line 16. It's actually the new paragraph. This is where we're starting today. So you all have Siddurim, HaOlah. This page, the new paragraph, HaOlah Kodesh Kadoshim. The Olah is an offering, which is the Holy of Holies. The criteria of HaOlah is that it's Keli la'ishim. The Eibishter gets all of it, and we get none of it. Right? HaOlah Kodesh Kadoshim, an Olah, an offering that goes completely up to Hashem, is the holiest of holy karbanos. Shechita, but Tzafon, it is Shechita in the northern side. V'kibul damah, the blood is gathered. V'klishadas, in the vessel of service, but Tzafon in the northern side. V'dama, and its blood, ta'un, requires shtei matanes, 2 offerings. Shein arba, which add up to 4 touches, because you put them on the corners. So each spray goes on 2 walls. U'tu'una, it requires hefshet. You strip off the skin. V'nituach, and after taking off the skin, you chop up the organs, the limbs, into pieces. And the Gemara says, a carbon oil is chopped up into relatively large pieces. You don't make it into small little pieces, they should burn quick. You put on the mizbeach big chunks of meat. V'cholei is completely consumed by the fires. This is the Mishnah about Olah, which is today's topic. Now, Rabbi say, last week we discussed carbon oil from 2 extremes. On the one hand, I told you could make an argument that the Olah is the least holy of the karbanos. V'haraya, a guy can bring a carbon oil. A guy can't bring a chatos, a guy can bring a nasham, and a guy can bring a shlomim, and a guy can bring a teida, and a nazir, and a pesach, and a meiser, and a bechor. There's different reasons why goyim cannot bring these various karbanos, but if you had to put them all into one thought, those karbanos all share one property, that people eat the meat. And sitting with the Eibush at the same table and eating meat, this is a matana that Hashem only gave Yidden. He didn't give it to goyim lahavdil. So when a kohen brings a carbon, when a lahavdil goy brings a carbon, it has to be an olah. So you can make a case that the olah is the least holy of the karbanos. On the other side of the coin, we argued,
What's the simple reason why only an olah for a goy?
You can't sit with Hashem and eat. The whole idea of sitting at the same table with the Eibush and eating food. Shlomim is the ultimate. Yeah, a chatas and a asham, the kohen eats for you. So at least the sinner is not eating his own meat. That's the Eibush and eating, but the food is eaten by a person. Achei l'sadam. But on the other hand, the carbon oil is the highest of all the karbanos, because the carbon oil is an atonement for a sin of thought. Meaning to say, if a person does something wrong, they bring a chatas. If a person thinks something wrong, there's no requirement to bring a carbon. But if he chooses to bring a carbon, the carbon is olah. And I explained it to you. The 2 examples that I gave you were, if I did an aveda, which required me to bring a sin offering and carbon chatas. First, I brought a chatas that the Eibush should forgive me, and after the chatas, you brought a olah. After you brought the sin offering and Hashem forgave you, you brought an offering of giving it to Hashem completely. The mashal for it is that a man was friendly with a king. A person had a very good relationship with a king. And then he was nisrach, he messed it up, he ruined it. And the king distanced himself from this person. So first of all, the king this person works very hard to get the king to forgive him. And after the king forgives him, he sends him a doiron, an offering. It's a peace offering. The offering which is sent after the atonement is that the king should be his friend. It's one thing to say, I forgive you. I have people that I've told in my life, I forgive you, but let's stay away from each other. It's better that way. I forgive you. No tainas, you understand? Sometimes you have a person, I forgive you, but listen. Olah means, not only do I want you to forgive me, I want to be your friend again. So after the chatas, there's an olah. After the chatas, there's an olah. You bring a sin offering, that Hashem should forgive you, and then you bring an olah, you should return to the Eibishter's graces. Alternatively, another model of an olah for a bittul aseh. If a person didn't do a mitzvah aseh, Rachman al he missed film, or he missed mezuzah, or he missed whatever it is. I have some stories that'll make you so uncomfortable about missing mitzvahs, and then Abaim's reaction to it. They make me uncomfortable. So you bring a carbon olah. So the olah offering is an offering of great closeness to Hashem on a higher level. It's not about sin. It's about coming closer to the Eibishter. The Rishonim say that the olah is about a sin in thought, coming closer to Hashem. Or to use the ultimate form, I think, that there's tshuva tata. Tshuva tata means they didn't have it and have to fix it. And this Tshuvei law, I feel far from Hashem and I want to get closer. Tshuvei law is I want to be closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Olah can be construed alternatively, both. As being a karb which is so universal, a goy can bring it also lahavdol. And on the other hand, it's so sublime that it's brought not for anything wrong, but just for the sake of coming closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And of course, the trademark of the Olah is that it's Ratzoi B'li Shuv. There's no return. I mentioned this to you last week, and it's going to be in next week's Sikha. Next week, the Haytach Halta Pekudei. So next week is Vayikra. By Karbonis, it says Olah Isha Reach Nechech LaHashem. Isha Eila Reich Nechech LaHashem. So Rashi says from the Gemara, Nachas Ruach Lefani Shamartev and Asaretzeini, that when a person brings a carbon, he gives me a special Nachas Ruach, because my will was carried out. So the Rebbe asks a simple kasha, and when I put on tefillin, I'm not giving Hashem a Nachas Ruach. And when I eat kosher, I'm not giving Hashem a Nachas Ruach. And when I keep Shabbos, or I bring Yiddish children into the world B'tara, I'm not giving Hashem a Nachas Ruach. So why by Karbonos, so they say Nachas Ruach more than any other mitzvah? The Rebbe explains it in Pshutei Shel Mikra, and the Rebbe adds it's because anytime I do a mitzvah, I get something back. I give and I get. A carbon I give and I don't get back. There's nothing in it for me. It's sacrifice. So Rebbe says, Nachas Ruach, my pleasure is Shamarti v'naseh retzoini, that I said, and I'm getting something from it, and you're not getting anything from it. But that is specifically, that is primarily, that is most obviously by a carbon Eila. You give it to Hashem, there's nothing in it for you. You give it away to the Eibishter. So Rabbi said, what we're going to do today, and I'm hoping to finish this Mishnah. Let's read the Mishnah inside. We're going to go over the Mishnah. HaOlah, the carbon which is completely consumed by the Mizbeach. Kodesh Kodashim is the Holy of Holies. And I mentioned to you last week that the only carbon where the word Kachei Kodashim is written is by Olah, because there's no pasuk that calls on Olah Kodesh Kodashim. There's no pasuk. By a Chata it says Kachei Kodashim. By a Asham it says Kodesh Kodashim. By a Olah it doesn't say Kachei Kodashim, so the Gemara has to say it, the Mishnah has to say it. And my proposal is that the reason the Psukim don't say by a Olah Kodesh Kodashim, because in one aspect it could be a much lower level of Kedusha as well. It has the Maila of being a lower Kachim as well. Shechita sa b'atzafein. The Shechita happens in the north. Now Rabbi say that even a guy could bring it. That's what I'm suggesting. Shechita sa b'atzafein. I have to understand. This is my 12th class, I think, on HaOlah Mikoman. That's an awful lot of talking on one page of Siddur. And I went through each word. I explained to you what Shechita means, and I explained to you what Tzafon means, and I explained to you what means matana. We went through a lot of ideas. I gave whole classes on each of these topics. So as we go through these Mishnayos, I'm just going to reference them. Shechita ein v'shachat alu mashach. Shechita means to raise up. Shechita means to lift up from a lower level to a higher level. When a person shechs an animal, he's raising it up from the madrega of chai to the madrega of medaber. In the midbar, listen to this. In the midbar, if a yid wanted to eat basar taiva, he was allowed. In the midbar, you could eat meat and not make a carbon out of it. But if you chose to eat basar taiva in the midbar, listen to this. You were not allowed to shecht. If you were in the midbar and you wanted to eat meat, you had to do what's called nechira, whatever nechira means. Gouging, you ripped out the throat, or whatever nechira means. You were not allowed to shecht. It's a weird thing. Why not? Who cares if you shecht? And the answer is, if you're eating meat in the midbar, where the furthest distance you could be from the Beis HaMikdash was 6 kilometers, 6 mil, or so whatever it is. If you do Ba'alachsen, it's 7 1/3, whatever the cheshbonis would be. And you don't want to go to the Mishkan and bring a carbon, you want to eat it as stam, there's no Shechita, you can do nechira, you can't shecht it. Meaning, you can eat the meat, but the meat is not having an aliyah. Shechita means to lift up. Ein, when a yid shechts, he's raising up the meat from the madrega of chai to the madrega of medaber. He's lifting it up. But Tzafon. And the event of raising up the behemoth from the level of behemoth and raising the madrega of Av happens in the north. Tzafon Rabbi Sai is Gevura, and again we talked about this at great length. I'll just go over the cliches, right? Is constructive criticism a good thing or a bad thing? If you can handle it, if you can't handle it, it's cruel. If you could handle it, it says in the Yem, Ahoves Abikedes. Tzafon means Gevura. Chavra, Gevura is not bad. Yitzchak Midas Gevura is not bad. He's just exact. But the truth hurts. The truth hurts. Tzafon hurts. But when you're bringing a carbon, there's a presumption that you're in a finer state. So a kachei kodeshim, a carbon which is in the higher status of kedusha, shchitasa, it is raised up at tzafon with incredibly precise critical judgment. That's the word. Shechita, it's shechita, it's being raised up, is done in a very exact way, which of course means, like we know, when you bring a korban, you're sacrificing your own behemoth. And Shechita Tzafon means that the sacrifice of one's own behemoth is done with incredible precision. And I'm reading on, V'kibul dama, the blood is gathered. B'kli shadas, in a vessel of service, but Tzafon also on the northern side. Rabbi say, this says in Chassidus, this is the only part of a korban Olah where you have a Keli, which means a shoiv. The korban goes away, but the blood is gathered in a Keli. And of course, the blood is gathered in a Keli not to hold it. The blood is gathered in a Keli to spray it. But the only aspect of a korban where you take something and you put it into a vessel, which shows on bringing it into the world, is the dam, which is put into a klishares. The significance of this at this moment, I don't know. But it's also done by Tzafon. The gathering of the blood in a Keli has to be done with great exactitude. So I explained this to you in earlier classes. There's two basic parts to the behemoth that go on the mizbeach. The blood, which represents the animal passion, and the fat, which represents the animal pleasure and lust. So the blood, which represents passion, is gathered in a Keli, has to be controlled, and is done in the northern side to indicate that the gathering of this passion of the animal, which is being made into an Olah, we're giving it away to Hashem completely, has to be done with great exactitude. Okay? V'dam, the blood requires. Now this is the first time we have this. So this is today's lecture. Today's arichis on these words. Shtei matones shehein arba. The blood was sprayed on the mizbeach 2 times, and it adds up to 4. How do you spray blood twice and it adds up to 4? If you spray on the corner. So Rabbi said, let's go over the conversations that we had. In other words, what I'm doing is I'm building on the earlier classes that I gave you in Aizehu Mikoman. And I'm sort of developing the ideas. What I already taught you at length, I'm going to go over now b'kitzir. And what I haven't taught you yet, we're going to develop more bepratius. I gave you the example of the difference between using your fingers and using your fist. You may remember. And I told you the way the Eibush made all mammals, they have very similar body design, same exact bones. They bring a raya to evolution, and we bring a raya that there's one God who created all. Everything was created in the same image. But a person was created in the divine image that's correct, and the animals were created in the divine image, which has been twisted and mangled and distorted and partialized. I know there's no such word, but I'm entitled to make up words. I'm past 50. As it relates to the Adam Ha'elyon, so all animals have 5 fingers that fuse into whatever it is, into whatever, a hoof or to a paw or to a claw, whatever the case is. Okay, so what's the difference between fingers and a fist? Fingers do things very precisely, right? There's dexterity, the ability to manipulate with your fingers is very, very exact, but they're not so strong. When you close your fingers and you make a fist, what's called an egreif, this is where you have force and power. So it's an interface. By the chatos, you use your finger. Because the chatos has to be specific. And the way I explain it to you, it's for a particular aveda. But an Olah is not about an aveda, chevre. An Olah is about God. And guess what? There's only one. In other words, I can do many avedas. I can omit many mitzvahs asay. But I can only have one relationship with one God because there is only one. So when it comes to the Olah, the sprinkling of the blood is not done with the finger. It's done with the equivalent of a fist. That's how I presented it to you. You take a beaker, a Keli, you gather the blood that pours out of the animal after the Shechita, and you throw it on the back with a force. You fling it out the back like this. It's called zrika. And I mentioned to you that there's 2 ways of doing that. One is to sprinkle it upwards, and by a b'chayr and a ma'is and a pesach, you actually pour it downwards. We'll get to Pesach. That's Mishna Ches. We're holding Mishna Dalet. We'll get to it. IYH, Im Yirtzeh Hashem, whenever that opportunity comes to us. So you're spraying it with force. And my understanding is, because a korban Olah is the whole person touching the whole God. You're not dealing with specifics. Like in Chatas. I'm connecting to Hashem. My heart wants to touch and be touched by the heart of Hashem. So you do it with a fist-like force, by spraying the blood rather than using your fingers. But it's done twice. You put it on here in this corner, and you put it on this corner. By sprinkling on the corner, automatically goes on 2 walls. When you sprinkle it on the corner, it goes on 2 walls. That's called 1 that adds up to 2. You put it on this corner, it goes here and here. That's called shtayim. You spray it twice. Shehein arba, but it ends up being 4 times because the blood ends up on all 4 walls. Now, Rabbi say, I'm sitting in the wrong spot, okay? Because Mizrach is behind me. Mizrach is behind me, okay? Right? If Mizrach is behind me, Dorim is here. This is the south. If I was facing Mizrach, this would be my right side. The south is here. The Kevesh is here. The Kevesh is here, right? Where's the animal shechted? But Tzafon, here. The Mizbeach is in Dorim. The Mizbeach is in the southern side of the Azara and in the middle, against the Oyel Mayed. The Shechita is called Tzafon. It's over here on this side, yeah? You shecht the animal over here, you gather the blood, and you spray 2 times. It's called Mizrachis Tzfenis, northeast, will be this corner. If this is east and this is north, Mizrachis Tzfenis, and then Marav is Dreimis, southwest. So you sprinkle it here, boom, and then you walk around, and you sprinkle it here, boom, and then you pour the blood on the Yesod on this side, and then the animal is butchered, and it goes up to Kevesh, and it's put on the Mizbeach. That's how you would, if you want to visualize it spatially, behind me is Mizrach, so the Kevesh would be here. The Kevesh would be here, and you would put the blood first on this corner, but the Shechita takes place here. So it's the first place that you meet. This corner is called Mizrach Tzafon, northeast, and then you would circle around to this corner, which is called Ma'ariv Dorim, southwest, and you would spray the blood in both of those corners. So there's a very, very Zisepardis, RaMaK, the Moshe. The RaMaK has a Pirush on Siddur, word for word, more even than the Arizal. It's incredible. The RaMaK, I think he lived 41 years, and he wrote so many Sfarim. He wrote so much. And it's Kabbalah, it's not like stories, you know. So it's brought that the RaMaK wrote his Sfarim Bashbas Akulmas. A person could not possibly write as fast as he wrote. He has a Pirush on Zohar the size of Vashas. It's this big, massive Sfarim.
What was the age difference between him and the Arizal?
He was I think he was a little bit older, and he passed away a little before. So he was a few years older. The RaMaK passed away, I think, at 41. That Arizal was in his 30s. Achei, student. He was the student because no one knew who he was. I mean, the Rebbe said when the Arizal started to talk, he didn't understand a single word. The Rebbe said, if the RaMaK is Eides HaTeira, then the Arizal is Eides HaRaMaK. Go ahead.
Parts of, like, let's say the Mizbeach and Karbanis, but only Kohanim are allowed to do it?
You bet your boots, man. Only Kohanim, Zechorim, Temimim, Tahorim, Ben Esrim Chamishan of Amayla.
So, is it only, like, why should they only learn it, or why should we also learn it?
Because when you and I sit here this morning and learn carbon Olah, we're being makriv carbon Olah Mizbeach. Every day when we say these karbanos, it's as if we're bringing each one of those karbanos. By studying the Torah of the carbon Olah, you're bringing the carbon Olah. And it's called kalkalaseinu, zuit akonaseinu. Our flaw that we don't have Mizbeach becomes our advantage. When there's a Mizbeach, only a Kohen can do it, only by day, and only in the Beis HaMikdash, and only Betara, with all kinds of requisites. Now anybody can bring a carbon anytime, any place, anywhere, under all conditions. By learning about it. Go ahead. You had your hand raised. Now, so the RaMaK says a gewaltige Zach. What's Mizrach Tzafon? Mizrach basically is Chesed, and Tzafon basically is Gevura. And I'm using the word basically because he explains everything very, very specifically. Mizrach is, whatever he calls it. I wrote it down here. Mizrach is Teferes, and Tzafon is Bina. So you're putting it on a corner. You're putting the blood in the corner that it splays out to 2 sides, that joins together an aspect of kindness with an aspect of severity and exactitude. Mizrach means to shine light. Tzafon means to hide or to conceal, and all the things that come along with that. Mizrach Tzafon means the blood is put in a place which joins together an aspect of kindness with an aspect of exactitude. Which means, even though the carbon itself is shechted in the north, which is pure Gevura, but the aliyah of the carbon is done in such a way where on the one hand you have to have Gevura, which means in life, things have to be correct, things have to be exact, things have to be precise, things have to be proper, but you're kind about it. There's a softness to it. And the same is true, Ma'ariv Dorim. Ma'ariv means the setting sun, which goes again, he goes at Malchus Apikabola. Dorim, the southern side, the Gemara says that in the southern side, there's more warmth and more heat, right? If you live in the northern hemisphere, you go south, it's warmer, you go north, it's colder. So this goes on, he calls it Malchus towards Chochmah, that Dorim is Chochmah, and Ma'ariv is Malchus. So the way the blood is put in the Mizbeach is, you do it twice, it adds up to 4 times, and in each case, The putting the blood on the Mizbeach joins together an aspect of Gevura with an aspect of Chesed. Now, you could look at it in different ways. The idea that when you take the blood and you put it on the Mizbeach, you don't do it 4 times like by Achatos, on each corner, with your finger. You do it twice, which I said before. By the way, I need to mention very, very important. One of the interesting features of the Mizbeach, which is considered very important, it's considered very important. In HaOlah and Nigla, Rashi brings it in Chumash, it's considered incredibly important. The Mizbeach had a gartel. Just like you wear a gartel and I wear a gartel, the Mizbeach wears a gartel. But there's a difference between our Mizbeach and the gartel, the Mizbeach, the Mizbeach of the gartel of the Mizbeach. We have, our body is divided into 3 sections. Chabad, Chagas, Nihi. We put the gartel at the 2/3 point, by your elbows. The place to put the gartel is not by your belt. The place to put your gartel is by your navel. Halub and navel. Where your belt, where your elbow, not by the atzilim, over here, by where your elbows end. This is what the diaphragm is. The diaphragm is called in the Chumash Yeseres. Yeseres ala kavod. I said it right. Yeseres means the diaphragm. In the Zohar, the Yeseres is called the Mechitza. In everybody's bowels, everybody's viscera, everybody's kishkis, there's mamish a wall, a membrane that separates what's called Eivari Hazon, the organs of digestion, from Eivari Haneshima, from the organs of respiration, of breathing. Kabbalistically, it separates Ruach from Nefesh. Above the diaphragm, you have the lungs and the heart, right? The heart pumps blood to the lungs. The lungs oxygenate the blood, then the blood goes back to the heart, and the heart sends it around to the whole body, and the blood brings all kinds of very, very necessary energy to the person to sustain the body and to have us be as mobile, as quick in our movements as we are. We shouldn't move at the speed of drying paint. It's because of the very, very efficient energy that the oxygen gives us that goes into the blood and then carries it to the whole person. So there's a wall, mechitza. We put our gartel at the 2/3 point of our body. The Mizbeach has a gartel, but at the halfway point. And if I had to give you words, I would say because Mizbeach doesn't have any feet. There's just a Chabad and I guess no feet, but I don't know if that's true. Our custom is that when we do glila by a Sefer Torah, we put the gartel low. We don't put it in the middle. Put it closer to the bottom. I have a theory as to why. I don't know if it's true. I made it up because it says in the Sichos that Sefer Torah doesn't have feet. Sefer Torah doesn't have any he. We're the feet of the Sefer Torah. When we dance the Sefer Torah, we're the feet of the Sefer Torah. So imagine the Sefer Torah as the 2/3 part of a person. It's not a whole person. It's 2/3 of the person. 2/3 of the person, half the person is closer to the bottom than in the middle. Because we're the feet of the Sefer Torah. The Mizbeach has a gartel. And the Mizbeach's gartel is called Chutshel Sikra, a red thread. In the Mishkan, it was made of copper, and it was called a michpar, which marked a halfway point on the Mizbeach. In the Beis HaMikdash, the Chutshel Sikra, it says the Mizbeach stood exactly Nun Ches, 58 Tfachim high. Divide that in half is 29 Tfachim. 29 Tfachim is a lot. It's almost 6 amas, and 6 amas, every amas is about 20 inches. You can figure out how much it is. It's 72 inches from the ground. At the midpoint of the Mizbeach, there was literally painted on the stone, on the brick, on the cement of the Mizbeach, a red thread. This red thread was very, very important. And this marked the separation, which is called higher bloods from lower bloods. Higher blood was chatos. The blood that went in the upper half of the Mizbeach is called chatos. And this is really weird, and I don't know why, and it's not negated this Perek, so I'm not going to have to worry about it. Oilas ha'oif. When you brought a bird, was upside down. The oilah was on top, and the chatas was on bottom. When you bring a behema, the blood of the chatas goes on the upper half. It goes on the corners of the Mizbeach. Oilas ha'oif, the blood goes above the gatel, above the Shechita sikra, and by all other karbanas besides of a chatas, and a chatas of birds, where everything is upside down, the blood was beneath the gatel. It was below that halfway point of the Mizbeach. And there's an explanation, not Kabbalah, what's the difference between the higher bloods and the lower bloods. It goes on a higher level and it goes on a lower level. But I would argue that in addition to going on a higher level and a lower level, it goes on a more specific type of avodah versus a more powerful type of avodah. The difference between the brain and the heart can be compared to the difference between fingers and a fist. So the chatas is like the brain, it's very specific. And the oil and all the other karbanas are like a fist. They're represented by spraying the blood with force beneath the halfway point of the Mizbeach, which is a level where things are not defined by their precision and specificity, but by their force, by their power, by their singularity, and so on. So, when you say, the Kabbalah says, that you put the blood in two corners in a way that each corner it was two walls, which combine Chesed and Gevura, your instincts are to say that we're being nice. Don't be so mean, right? Don't be so critical. Don't be so exact. Don't be so demanding. Be nice. When you mix Chesed and Gevura, that means you're taking away from the exactitude of the Gevura. Gevura is not mean. Gevura is just honest, but it can hurt like Gehenim. Twice. Just to tell, if people would tell me the truth about myself, I would be in constant pain. I'd probably be a better person, but I would be very, very upset. And it would be very depressing. Because everybody, have chesroinus. So when you say you're mixing, when you're sprinkling the blood on this corner, and it goes on two walls, and you sprinkle it on this corner, it goes on two walls, so the Kabbalah that RaMaK suggests, this is what he calls Tiferes with Bina, this is what he calls Chochmah with Malchus. Mixing Chesed and Gevura would sound like a pshara, it's compromise, you're making it less, right? The Hebrew word pshara means compromise, means to melt. If you have a body of water, and you put into these body of water chemicals, and the chemicals are not good for you, so without going into the what's the word I'm looking for, the ethics of it, water is a solvent. What the water is going to do is going to dissolve the chemicals. And they use the words in B, P, M, P, P, B. What does that mean? P, P, T. Parts per million, parts per billion, parts per trillion. In other words, depending on the nature of the chemical, a person can drink a certain amount of chemical without getting sick. So if the water is enough of a solvent, it'll dilute it so much that the amount of not health toxins you'll get in a cup of water will be so small that it's not going to hurt you because it's been dissolved. But that's not getting rid of the bad, it's simply dissolving it. That's what the word pshara means. Compromise. I have a little good and a little bad. If I mix the good in the bad in enough good, it'll be so dissolved, it'll be so broken down, it'll be so melted that it'll virtually no metzias. You can't say it has no metzias at all because it does exist, but it's virtually no metzias. So you could argue that when the karbanos are brought and that RaMaK, Ramesha Kodavidu, was kind enough to tell us that the shtayim shehinarbe, putting the blood in the mizbeach twice, and it touches four walls, is a mix in both cases of Tzafon and Mizrach, which is Tiferes, which is a midah towards Chesed, and Bina, which is a midah towards Gevura. And then you put it in Ma'ariv Dorim, which is Chochmah, which is a midah which is obviously towards Chesed, and Malchus, which is a midah which is obviously towards Gevura. It's dilution. But I don't think that that's the pshat. I think the pshat is very, very different. The way Gevura works is azoi. Gevura is very exact. Gevura is very judging. If anybody has such a parent, or if anybody has such a teacher, it hurts. We're Americans. We like the people to be nice to us. You know, I'm reading Rabbi Groner's book, Rabbi Groner's biography, volume 1. And the way I'm reading the book is I'm trying to read it as slow as possible because I don't want it to end. And I read everything a few times because it's like stories of the Rebbe that you never heard, important stories from the best possible source that have been hidden away for 60 years, and boom, here they come. So in the story that I read over this weekend was that there was a Yid who was waiting online for Yechidus. It's a long, complicated story. Yechidus was very frustrating. He waited all night. And a guy was Adam Choshev apparently. Rabbi Groner didn't put him in first. So he hit Rabbi Groner. He hit him. Let me give him a patch. Rabbi Chadakov told the Rebbe. This person hit Rabbi Groner. And I believe Rabbi Chadakov felt that was his job. Rebbe Groner was hated by so many people for doing his job. He once told somebody, don't be upset with him. I told him not to let you in. Anyway, this guy hit Rebbe Groner. And Rabbi Chadakov told the Rebbe. I think Rabbi Chadakov had to tell the Rebbe, because if the Rebbe wouldn't know, people would really hurt him. And he needed to be protected. His job was to protect the Rebbe, and the Rebbe had to make sure that people didn't hurt him. So the Rebbe asked Rabbi Groner the next day what happened. And Rabbi Groner was forced to tell the Rebbe. And the Rebbe says, Rabbi Groner, you know that when he hit you, his wife was crying. She was so embarrassed. He lost himself. I mean, he hit the Rebbe's mosque and he lost himself. He was very upset. It was late at night. He waited so long, and then he has to wait more because some bucket went ahead of him. He hit him. So the Rebbe Groner said to the Rebbe, I didn't see that his wife was crying. And the Rebbe said to this Rabbi Kuf, it doesn't say his name, just his first initial, you must apologize to the label. And the Rebbe said these words. Label is an ehrliche junger Mann. Aber er ist ein Amerikaner. Ein Amerikaner, ein Schlocktim, ist sehr marked. A label is a very good Jew, but he's American. And Americans don't like to be beaten. When you hit an American, he doesn't forget. Apologize. So he apologized. I mean, that's the story. He apologized. What a story. I mean, we should have known this story for the last 50 years. It's in this book. And there's 1,000 like this. Every page. Anyway, so Gevura hurts. Gevura hurts. But there's a flip side to the Gevura. Gevura is very exact. But you know what's fun about Gevura? If Gevura judges and determines that you're good, you deserve, Gevuras don't give out quarters, you understand? They give out $100 bills. The same energy that judges has a force for good. Gevura's chesed is betagboides. That's how it's explained. And I'm proposing that's what the pshat is. A korban of kachay kadeshim is all Gevura. The Shechita is Tzafon, it's Gevura. Tzafon is Gevura. Everything is very, very precise. When you put the blood on the mizbeach, the Gevura is sweetened. But the sweetening of the Gevura does not mean that it's being diminished. The sweetening of the Gevura means when a person brings a korban, which means he judges himself, and he brings himself into a state of exactitude, there is a chesed from that Gevura. And when Gevura gives, when Yitzchak gives, as opposed to when Avraham, who means a chesed, and Yankov means a teferes, Yitzchak is means a Gevura. When Gevura gives, he gives anashir. That's why, isn't it ironic that Yitzchak, whose midas Gevura, his name means laughter. What's Gevura about laughter? Gevura is not bad. Gevura is just exact. And when exact determined that there's a reason to laugh, nobody laughs like Yitzchak. And the same is true here. The idea that the Gevura of the blood is sweetened is not a diminution, it's not a pshara, it's not a compromise. It's the symptom of the exactness being right. So there is mizrachis tzfeinis, which the RaMaK calls a mixture of teferes and bina. That means the exactitude results in a gilui, and maravis dreimis, which is the chachma being mixed with malchus, which is also the exactitude being mixed with an enlightenment, with a chesed. And that's the meaning of shtei matone shenar. But I have to understand, I'm explaining this today at length, but every one of the Mishnahs from this point forward, Asham, Toida, El Nazir, Shlomim, are all going to have shtei matone shenar. The same model that we just did today is going to be each, but I'm not going to spend 20 minutes on it. I'm going to spend 2 minutes on it. And I'm going to say, remember in the second class on carbon oil, I explained this to you, that the shtei matane shein arba beads, that you're using force to connect the yid to the eibishter rather than a finger, which is a precision. And it's done in such a way that the Gevura is sweetened. Okay, so read the words inside. HaOlah kodesh kodashim, HaOlah is a holy of holy carbon. Shechita sabat tzafon, the Shechita is in the north. V'kibul dab v'achresh tzafon, the blood is gathered in the north. V'dom maton, the blood requires. Shtei matone sheinabe, do it twice, and it adds up to 4, because it's saviv, it circles the whole mizbeach, and it's in such a way that each matona is a mixture of Gevura and chesed in the most favorable way. And then it says a tuna hefshet, you have to peel off the skin. So I saw in a sefer called Likutei MaharICh, who brings a pshat from the Shiniv. It's all Polish Chassidus. The good Lamrich is a Goan Oilam. It's called Likutei MaharICh. It's a commentary from the Chassidus Yid. It's such goines. Bachsidim sind gewähnt größe goinem. I'm somehow Ungarische. He quotes the Shiniv, the son of the Tanzer, who says a very interesting thing. And I'm going to give you a shtick al hakdama. And again, this is a pshat. When the carbon oil is put on the mizbeach, they peel off the skin. The hide. The skin of an animal is worth money. You can use it to make sefer Torah, tefillin, mezuzahs. You can use it to make shoes. You can use it for 1,000 purposes. And the skin was not burnt. The skin was given to the kohanim. In other words, even though a korban oila, its trademark is that the whole thing goes to Hashem. You keep nothing for yourself. Nothing for yourself. The whole korban goes to the eibishter. The skin stays by the kohanim. So there's a lot of different ways, of course, that you can explain it, but I want to start with the following. There's a Indian in Yiddishkeit called tzaras. What's tzaras? What's leprosy? It doesn't go to Teda. What's tzaras? A person who's perfect on the inside, whose only chesrenis is on the dermis, or the epidermis, on the chitzonius, the outermost parts of his body. So you see sickness. A person who's schmutzig on the inside is not getting tzaras. That's why the RaMaK writes, it's not shchiach. Today there's no leprosy. At least it's not common. Because the Rebbe writes that tzaras only befalls those who are tiknu kol advarim, a biru kol amaisim, a biru kol advarim, tiknu amaisim. If a person did his whole shlichus in this world, and his chesrenis is just on the periphery, then he gets tzaras. That's why the times of the Beis HaMikdash, the shchiach, the Rambam, the Rebbe brings a diuk. B'chlal, when you do an aveira, you should be called enish, because the enish means weakness. By tzaras it says Adam. Adam is the highest level of a person, even higher than ish. Adam kiye be'er besaris eises apachas be'er. Alter Rebbe says, how do you say Adam by tzaras? Tzaras is nish chutz mishalish machnes, is tame yikra boded yesha. Tzaras ain't kleinigkeit, the worst aveira in the world. So the Alter Rebbe says, because tzaras is a person whose chesron is in the most chitzonius level, but because he's so pure, you see it on his outside level. And the Rebbe connected it to the idea that Mashiach, the Gevura says, that Mashiach is called Gevura de Beirab, Mashiach is a Mitzvah. Because Mashiach is perfect, except on the outermost level there's a chesron. And the way the Rebbe explained it is that Mashiach comes when Yidden are in a madrege, where they're perfect and the only thing left for Yidden to fix is the outermost levels. That's how the Rebbe explains it. So tzaras would be what? A person who's perfect on the inside, and the chesron is only on the outside. So the MaharICh brings, he bases it on a Teda of the Shineveh. It's not the same Teda, but that carbon HaOlah is faked. A person has a chesron on the inside, and the outside is perfect. Now, which is better? To be perfect on the inside and have a chesron on the outside, or be perfect on the outside and have a chesron on the inside? Well, that the
Isn't that just a faker? Like, what is
it's a tzavua. On the outside, everything is right, and on the inside, there's a chesron. By tzaras, everything on the inside is perfect, right? But what's the havana shebedavid? The havana shebedavid is that in Yiddishkeit, we go from the outside in, not from the inside out. What's the most important thing in being a Jew? Doing the mitzvahs. What about the kavanah? There's no limit. The whole definition of a carbon Olah is what? That my chesron is the chet b'machshava. A carbon Olah is not brought for a sin. For a sin you bring a chatas. For a carbon Olah you bring for a person who did something and he wasn't thinking about the Eibishter for a minute. Carbon Olah is a carbon you're not bringing for a big aveira. You bring it for I could be more perfect. I could be closer to Hashem. So it's only on the inside. So he says, the MaharICh says, Likutei MaharICh brings that the peeling off of the skin is because they're talking about a Yid whose skin is perfect. Let's use fancy language as a Beinani. On the outside, everything is good. And because everything is good, there does not have to be a carbon that's peeled off first and is given to the Koyanim, and the Koyanim have enough of it. It belongs to the Koyanim. They get the Mishus, a carbon, a Kachek Kadashim carbon doesn't belong to you, it belongs to the Beis HaMikdash. Kachim Kalim does belong to you. We're going to get to that in Mitzvah Hashem as soon as we can. When we get to the Mishnah of Achei Ve'el Nazir, I'm planning on it, but Hashem's help, of course. He does like this: a carbon Olah, you give away to the Eibush to the whole carbon in that place where there can be the smallest chesron. And small chesronos are always on the inside, and on the outside they're perfect. You know, you can look at it two ways. I have a story. What happens to people? Both are true, but they're just different personalities. A person, there's a story with the Anas Rashela. Back and tell you the story, but the point. Sometimes people are very, very passionate, incredibly passionate about the Eibishter. What happens to people who are incredibly passionate about Hashem? They make people near them uncomfortable. Their energy, their effervescence, their spillover makes people feel them get burnt. That's a chassan on the outside. That's tzaras. Here it's faket. On the outside is good, miyushiv. But inside is the chesron. So you peel off the skin where this person is perfect. Let the kohen have it, which is almost like as if saying the kohen is eating it. Even by a carbon Olah, there's no eating. And the meat, which is where the chesron is, this goes up on the mizbeach to be uplifted. So the chesron should be taken off. The word from the Likutei MaharICh. It's a word. It's a pshatel. It's interesting. It's not, I make up so many things. Why can't he? And he's not even making it up. He calls it Divrei Cheskel, the Shir Rebbe. I didn't have a chance. I saw it last week, and I didn't have a chance this week to look at it again. He correlates it. The Shir Rebbe says a word on something which I forgot, and on that basis he explains this pshat. So hefshet, you peel off the skin. B'chlal by karbonis, the hide, the skin was saved. It wasn't destroyed, and it was given to the kohenim. The exception is the ponim anasraf, v'sinim anasraf, those animals, those chatois that the mizbeach didn't eat, that was burnt outside the camp. Then they burnt them with the skin, with the hide. But b'klal carbon, you peeled off the hide, and the kohenim or the pile, depending what carbon it was, would receive it. It would be theirs, and they could use it for other purposes. It would go out l'chulin, or they have to be paid it. I forgot this halachas, and it was theirs. It was theirs. No, maybe it was automatically theirs. It was theirs to use for their own economic purposes. A kohen was a way of making a living. You made some mikdash, you get a couple animal skins. You can make a few mezuzahs. Today that's $1.5 million, whatever it costs a mezuzah nowadays. Especially if it's dakis and the notchai. Be that as it may, the skin was peeled off, says Likutei MaharICh, because in a carbon oil, the chassidus is not on the level of the outside, only on the level of the inside. And then it says, I'm reading it required hefshet, peeling off the skin, you give it to the kohen, v'nituach, you cut it up into pieces, but big pieces. I think this is interesting. If you take fresh meat, and when you want to burn it, burning fresh meat is a bad idea. I once saw a quote from a famous biologist who said, water wanted to take a walk, so he created life and he became mobile. Water wanted, a living creature like 75% water, every living thing. If you're alive, you're an incredible percentage of H2, of water. And you're taking a fresh piece of meat and you're putting it on a fire. So the Torah says you got big pieces, not little ones. It would make sense to chop it up. The smaller pieces you are, the more likely, the more surface, the quicker the water is going to dry out. But you took big chunks of meat, just the way they were, you threw them on the mizbeach. Limb by limb. There was a seder how, but the Gemara, a regular chatos, a regular tamid, which was a sheep or a goat, not a behemoth, it was 7 or 8 koyanim, the ganze maise, and it was pretty big pieces. They didn't cut it into little tiny pieces. You cut it up, but you don't have to break them, but you have to dislocate them. You have to disconnect the joints. I guess in some cases you had to break the bones. It's not a carbon pesach. Carbon pesach, yeah, only by carbon pesach. It's a lav etzem the tisha is only by carbon pesach, and only if it has kazai is basar. When the meat is off, it's no shaila. The problem becomes if you have a bone that has marrow inside. So there's a chazayas of marrow inside, so you're not allowed to break the bone because of the marrow inside, but you can't get to the marrow because you're not allowed to break the bone. So my thought is, cutting it up into big pieces means this. You're giving a carbon to Hashem in such a way where you're keeping nothing for yourself. Nothing. Oh wait, it's maybe all God's. And if you're giving it all the way to the Eibishter, what difference does it mean how you give it? So my thought is that even when you're giving something away to Hashem, there's also a seder. A seder is you cut it up into pieces, as should be normal. But you don't cut up into teeny tiny little pieces because big pieces is sufficient. In other words, the Torah is teaching us that even when you're doing something in a way which is completely of sacrifice, there's the way it's supposed to be, and you don't modify that. I want to share with you an interesting thing. And this is something which was pointed out to me by my fathers, and a lot of people didn't see these kinds of things. I'm sure many people did, but you had to have a certain sensitivity to see these kinds of things. One of the things we was able to see is to watch the Rebbe eat and drink. By Fabrengen. I saw the Rebbe eat cake and drink water and wine, and then matzah, Pesach ate challah, Yom Tov ate challah, and my Pesach ate matzah. We didn't the Rebbe eat chicken and fish. The people who are by the Sudas upstairs watched the Rebbe eat gefilte fish, kipshuta. He would put so much salt on the fish. Yitzchak Raskin told me it was like snow. You couldn't see the fish. Pure salt. It was a whole seder by the Rebbe how he ate fish. But we was to see the Rebbe eat. And besides for all the other things, and the truth of the matter is, if you understand real people, it's easier to daven properly than to eat properly. By Chassidish culture, outside Chabad, more than Chabad, there's a tish. The tish is pachet a meal. The Rebbe sits in public and eats, and the Chassidim eat with him. The eating of a tzaddik is avodas Hashem. It's holy, if you're talking about a real tzaddik. And the eating of a tzaddik in a certain aspect is a deeper expression of holiness than the davening and the learning. Why? Because when the tzaddik is davening and learning, he's involved in holiness, right? Torah is called shalom. Tefillah is called cherev shel shalom, a sword of peace. And food is called mulchaba. Nama pu mechar baleich. It says in Zohar, when you eat food, you use a knife. So it's explained in Chassidus, what does this mean when you eat bread, you use a knife? Anytime you're involved, it's a mulchama. Sitting with a tzaddik or standing by a tzaddik and watching him eat it's a chutzpah. You know, al pi Allah, you're not supposed to look at a person's face who eats. By a kalash, you're not allowed to look into her face. Machzeret says panel, even by the Gevura Pesach. You're not supposed to look at a person who eats. But we looked at the Rebbe eating and drinking. And you could learn so many things from how the Rebbe ate. One example is the Rebbe didn't sip. The Rebbe didn't sip. He finished the cup in 2 or 3 gulps, which was like Shulchan Aruch. If you have a small cup, you can finish it in one. Because in halacha, there's a balance. There's a gargaron, someone who gulps. And then I forgot the other words, and someone who sips. In other words, halachas of derech eretz work that drinking too fast is disrespectful, and drinking too slowly is too gluttonous. There's a middle. And the halacha is that in ordinary cost, you take 2 or 3 sips to finish the whole bechet. And that's how the Rebbe, you watch Rebbe drink. You can just be videos of the Rebbe drinking mistama. But I don't know, maybe you have from Birchas HaMazon. And when the Rebbe ate bread and cake, and the Rebbe didn't have teeth, it was painful, mamish painful. The Rebbe didn't have a tooth in his mouth. The Rebbe was chewing and chewing and chewing and chewing. A fresh piece of marble cake took him, and it got katsein. One of the miracles of the Rebbe, which was in front of our eyes, the Rebbe had not a tooth in his mouth. First of all, he looked normal. And second of all, besides for a tiny lisp, the Rebbe's speech was crisp. A human being cannot speak without teeth. It's impossible. Certainly to speak for so long. The Rebbe just got katsein. And when the Rebbe ate, he would chew and he would chew and he would chew and he would chew. His mouth, of course, was closed and he would wipe his lips frequently. But when the Rebbe put cake in his mouth, it was a big shear. The Rebbe didn't put little crumbs. The Rebbe would eat, the Seder by the Rebbe was at the beginning of the Fabrengen, he would eat a shear. A shear means a kazayas. Before he sat in Alamich, he would eat another shear. I'm talking Shabbos when he didn't wash. And besides for that, the whole Fabrengen, the Rebbe did not touch the cake. Now the Lumdim are going to say after 72 minutes he can't bench. But the Rebbe didn't hold that. The Rebbe held that if you're in the middle of a Suda, it doesn't matter how long. And the ultimate example of this, which is halachically very problematic, is the Rebbe used to make Havdalah. And drink a cup of wine, stand up and give Kesha Bracha for 3 or 4 hours. Not sipping a drop of water. Sit down and make an alagefen. You had 3 times 72 minutes between the Priyagofen and the alagefen. Because the Rebbe held, and Rebbe can learn it, that if you're busy with the same activity, the idea that after a certain amount of time the Suda ends is not true. A Suda, after 72 minutes, you can't bench if you walked away from the table. But if you're being Isik B'Suda, the Rebbe used to literally have 3 or 4 hours between the Be'er Priyagofen and drinking the wine and the alagefen. We saw it every time. So by a Fabreng was 5-6 hours. The Rebbe ate a kazayas of cake in the beginning. At the end, again, a kazayas of cake. He did make another bracha b'Temimim mezenes. And one other thing which I'm going to share with you, again, you can probably see in the movies, when the Rebbe, he didn't touch the cake the whole Fabrengen, except to give it to other people. He would drink l'chaim, but he wouldn't touch the cake. But when the Rebbe said a maimer, I watched this so many times. When the Rebbe would say a maimer chassidus, when the maimer was over, the Rebbe would open up his napkin. The Rebbe had a big pile of cake, right? A big pile like this here. You see in the pictures, yeah? But the Rebbe would take a napkin and fold it up to make it like a little of a pocket. And he would take 2 or 3 pieces or 4 pieces from that big pile and put it into the napkin. And that's what he ate the whole Fabrengen. The big pile of cake he didn't touch. He would give it to other people. The Rebbe would take 3 or 4 pieces. This is what he ate. After the maimer, so if you would watch, and we all watched, before the maimer, you would see the Rebbe lean forward and put his hand in his pocket and pull out the kerchief. And then you would see the Rebbe, as we were singing, he would lean forward and put the kerchief on his finger. You could watch the Rebbe do it if you paid attention. As a little child, I once crawled underneath the Rebbe's place, and I could see the Rebbe under the table with the kerchief on his fingers in the middle of a maimer, swinging his hands vigorously on top of the table. It looks like the Rebbe is sitting as a ruyik, and the hands were moving with such force. You could see the Rebbe lean forward and put his hand in his pocket, and then lean forward again and put it on his finger. And when the maimer was finished, you would see the Rebbe lean forward again, take the kerchief off, and always the Rebbe would wipe his eyes after the maimer, every time. Always he would wipe his eyes. After the Rebbe would wipe his eyes, he'd put the kerchief away, either in here or in here, and the Rebbe would lean forward and open up the napkin and break off a crumb of cake. Every time. A crumb, a breke, that tiny piece. pop it in his mouth. I have a memory, and I would watch the Rebbe like I'm a shuganet. I would watch every hanhage. The Rebbe broke the cake into a tiny piece, and then he looked at it and he put it down. He didn't take it. And he answered l'chaim to a few people. Suddenly the Rebbe turned very quickly back to the cake, took one piece, put it in his mouth, took a second piece, put it in his mouth. And in my fantasy, I was thinking, when the Rebbe says a maimed, he's in another world. That's why they put a kerchief on their finger. And my fantasy was that the Rebbe always, after every maimed, he took a crumb of cake. This was like the Rebbe with the bagel and butter. I said, I bring himself into the world. So one Shabbos, the Rebbe tried, okay, let's see if I can do it without the cake. And then he ended up eating 2 pieces. I was a witness to this, I saw with my eyes. Anyway, these are little details which some people are going to think are trivial and maybe not even respectful, but these are things that we witnessed. What I'm trying to share with you, when the Rebbe put a piece of cake in his mouth, it wasn't a little piece, it was a shear. How much food can a person put in his mouth at one time and not be considered a glutton? A beya is 2 ounces. That's halach. The Rebbe used to, when he would eat the mezainis in the beginning of the farbrengen, at the end of the farbrengen, he didn't put teeny tiny little pieces. He didn't eat like a sensitive kala. He ate like the Shechita. He would put large pieces of cake. It was a big piece. And he put it in his mouth. The reason I'm pointing this out is because so many halachas of derech eretz. What the halachas of derech eretz means, the laws in Shulchan Aruch about how a person is supposed to behave. You don't sip food, drink, because that's considered not enjoying it too much. You don't gulp, drink, it's also technish. And the same is true with food. You don't put tiny pieces in your mouth, you put normal sized pieces in your mouth. And that's this halacha. You put meat into pieces, but not tiny pieces. Even though for the mizbeach it would have been easier to burn it up, because there's a derech eretz, even in a carbon olah. The whole carbon is going to the Eibishter, and there's a derech eretz into how that is done. Okay, and then the last 2 words of this Mishnah are v'chol isim. It's consumed by the mizbeach, by the fire completely. I have 5 different pshatim and call. The only reason I don't want to do Olah next week. I want to go on to the next Mishnah. Ishim means multiple fires, more than one, and you can explain it in a variety of different ways. You could explain it that since the carbon Olah nobody eats, only Hashem. The fires of the mizbeach were eating it for the Eibishter, which is called achilas mizbeach. And it was eating it for us, which is called achilas adam. Alternatively, and this I want to stop for a moment and talk about. It's brought in Kabbalah, it's explained in Chassidus, that is what's called nehera chivra, nehera ukma. Right, fire has many colors. And how does it work? Take a look at a candle. You have a wick and a fire. The fire closest to the wick has a very dark hue, has a very dark color. It's almost black. It's like a navy blue, very deep. And as the flame radiates outward, it changes colors. It becomes lighter blue, and then it becomes red, it becomes a yellow. And then it becomes a white, and it becomes invisible. The nature of flame is the closer it is to the fuel, the deeper the color, and as it goes further away, it becomes lighter and lighter. This is explained mystically, that fire which has a color is the fire which is fighting with the fuel. The fire which doesn't have a color is above the struggle. Fire represents godliness. The fuel represents worldliness. The meaning of fire and fuel is the struggle between godliness and worldliness. The part of the fire which is dark is the fire which is fighting with the fuel. The part of the fire which is light is pure. It's not fighting with the fuel. In fact, in my mother of Chanukah, there's something fascinating. The darker fire is associated with the wick. The lighter fire, which is further away from the wick, is associated with the oil. That's how it's explained in my mother of Chanukah. That the shemen, which is meant to burn, is connected to the white fire. The psila, the wick, which is not necessarily meant to burn, produces a fire that's dark, nehera chivra, nehera ukma. So now, it says in the Mishnah, isim, the carbon of the mizbeach was consumed by fires, lashon rabim. And by the way, according to the Rambam, Ishim is Malachim, and according to grammatician, whatever the word is, people know grammar, Ishim means people, mentioned, but it was not mentioned, it was Eisham is Be'ach. Ishim Lashon Rab means that the carbon was consumed by the black fire and the white fire. It was consumed on the level where the fire is fighting with the meat, and it was consumed on the level where the meat and the fire are no longer in fight, they're in a state of peace. Like I always explain to you, the Beis HaMikdash had 3 fires. The Chassidus was a fire where the fuel and the fire were one, like a cigarette. The fire of the Meneda, the wick, the fire and the fuel are separate, but it's a peaceful fire. Vayar the Mizbeach was a war. While you're burning wood and fresh meat, there was so much water there, the fire was fighting with the moisture. That's why it was a noisy, dynamic fire. But what happens when you put a fresh piece of meat into a fire? It makes noise, it sizzles, and it dries out, and dries out, and dries out, and dries out. But after all, meat is made of carbon. Carbon burns. Carbon is a fuel, it burns. So when the meat dries out, it becomes consumed by the fire. And when the meat is still there, it's a fight, it's noisy. And as the meat dries, it becomes more and more peaceful, until, if you've ever been at a good bivouac, if you stay up all night, there's no big flames, the teepee is gone, whatever you build, the square is gone. But you can have 6 inches of embers, right, of coals from wood that are just glowing hot. They're quiet, they're not whizzing, but they're incredibly hot. You put a piece of wood on that, in a second it burns, because it's unbelievably hot and unbelievably dry. So the Mizbeach would consume the meat on a level of Ishim, various fires. The first fire was engaged in a war with the meat, which is an Avodas Hashem, the fight between the Yetzer and the Yetzer Hara, or to use the language of the earlier Shiyurim, where you're destroying the animal. The second fire is taking that meat after it's already dried, and now it's cooperating. It's not fighting with the fire. It's cooperating with the fire and it's being burned peaceably, which again, in the language of the early Shiyurim, is after you kill the animal and you sacrifice the animal, the mensch is raised up. And that's such kolon lo ishim, the carbon oila went on his back in such a level, such a way that it was consumed by fire on various madregas. Okay, thank you for listening. I'll see you in a week. See you tomorrow.